I grew up in Northwest Indiana in a university town surrounded by corn and soybean fields. And when I was in the 4th grade, my class went on a field trip to the Art Institute of Chicago. We were ready to see the water lilies and American Gothic. If you're at all familiar with the area, you know that in order to get there, we had to drive through Gary, Indiana. Gary was a classic company town founded by US Steel, and it was once considered a crown jewel of the industrial world, called the city of the century. People flocked to this new town with high hopes and the promise of good jobs. But when my classmates and I drove through Gary on the bus, we saw boarded up windows, overgrown grass, and I remember asking my seatmate, where are the people? Over decades of consolidation, outsourcing, and process changes, plant shut down in Gary, and the people who work there left too. When I think about Gary, I think about the people who left and the cat and mouse game they must have had to play, chasing jobs that require their skills. I think about how that becomes harder and harder to maintain as jobs leave, as skills become obsolete, and when there isn't a clear way to develop your capabilities where you are. In 2021, even without a global pandemic, millions of Americans are still unable to fully participate in the economy. And that's due in large part to a mismatch between the skills that they have and the skills in greatest demand. And even further, high costs for learning and dominant paradigms about career trajectories and about how and when career learning should happen may pose a barrier to folks who might otherwise invest in their capabilities. And all of that's a shame because reskilling at scale has the ability to help our country attack the profound economic inequalities we face. It can also help us realize the full potential of emerging industries that need people to fuel their growth. And interestingly, reskilling might even help us recast the way we see ourselves, not as people with fixed abilities, one-trick ponies, but instead as people who are fundamentally capable of growth. The good news is that we can decide to develop infrastructure to make reskilling at scale happen. And while there is absolutely a role for government and for nonprofits, I'm going to focus on what companies can do. Companies need to be at the center of reskilling efforts because they know their skill set needs and can forecast those needs better than anybody. Companies are also in many ways the direct beneficiary of any labor force advancement. And conveniently, companies have direct access to much of the American workforce by virtue of being employers. So in order to meet the moment for reskilling, there are 3 things companies can do. Number 1, come together to determine their skill set needs. Number 2, develop programming to teach those skills. And number 3, play matchmaker between learners and programming and teach. Taken together, these steps can position our labor force to skill up and to participate more fully in the economy. Let's start with number 1, companies coming together to determine the skills that they need within their ranks. Having a handle on skill set needs can help companies refine the scope of their reskilling efforts to ensure that they're aligned with their actual requirements. It can also help learners cut through the noise and focus on what's actually important to companies. So in that way, having a handle on skill set needs can help players on both sides of the equation align their efforts. A critical piece of this step is that companies need to come together in order to do this. And I'll suggest that they come together at the industry level, given that firms within industries tend to have important similarities. All players in an industry have the ability to benefit when their labor force is expanded and improved. So if everybody has the ability to benefit, everybody needs to be involved. Our second step is for companies to develop programming to teach the skill sets that they need. And there are a few ways that they might do this. One approach is to partner with organizations that already teach the skills that they're interested in. So depending on the skill set needs, depending on the target populations that they're interested in engaging, there may already be a bevy of nonprofit and for-profit players who provide offerings. Colleges and universities may be an obvious choice for certain companies. They have vast infrastructure for learning, and their bread and butter is delivering credible learning experiences at scale. On the other end, companies may consider developing programming from scratch. In certain circumstances, they may find that outside organizations may not be well equipped to teach the skills that they're interested in having. They may also find that outside partners may not serve the populations that they're most interested in engaging. So for example, many opportunities exist for people at the entry level to develop their skills, but fewer opportunities exist for people at later stages in their career. As such, it may be appropriate for companies to consider ways that they can support learners across their career span. Our final step is for companies to play matchmaker between learners and programming and actually implement these programs. And there are two sides of this. On the one end, companies can engage their existing employees. Acting as a facilitator, they can help their employees understand their strengths and their interests in the context of the business's needs, and then use that information to place learners on the appropriate pathway. The result is that over time, employees and companies, by extension, are able to modulate their capabilities to meet the demands of the day. So instead of getting laid off, employees can find new purpose. And instead of expensive talent searches, companies can use the talent right in front of them. The other side of this is companies engaging prospective talent. You can imagine situations in which it does make sense for a company to look outside of its four walls, particularly if it's looking to expand its headcount. Under this approach, they can act as a facilitator to help prospective employees think about their strengths and interests in the context of business needs, and then use that information to connect them to learning pathways. Doing so allows companies to make sure that they're filling all of their seats and operating at peak capacity. If all of this sounds expensive to you, you're right. But so is recruiting every time you can't find the skills that you need in-house. According to the Society for Human Resource Management, it costs a US company an average of a little over $4,000 per employee to recruit. And that doesn't include the 40 to 50 days on average it takes to find that employee. Creating a reskilling regime involves reallocating the significant talent investments that companies are already making. An equally compelling cost, though, comes from all of the opportunities not seized because companies don't have the capabilities and capacity in-house to execute. And it's for these reasons that reskilling can't just be a pet initiative. Reskilling has the ability to unleash the full potential of our workforce and of our industries. And that's why companies from Nike to Amazon to Walmart are all making these investments. Now I want you to imagine for a moment being called into your boss's office. You know that your division hasn't been hitting its numbers despite your hardest efforts. And you also know that the company would be silly not to make changes. But when you sit down, you're not met with conversation about a pink slip or talk about how you and the company need to go in different directions. Instead, you're met with a conversation about you and the role that you can play in moving the company forward. By growing your capabilities, growing your know-how, you can be the solution. When we make reskilling the norm, we can make this situation the norm too. Companies don't have to get up and leave, and workers don't have to be the cat chasing the mouse. We can decide to make this our reality. Thank you.